increasingly, probably due to the fact that students were engaged in physical confrontations with the police, they began to fight back when teachers administered corporal punishment to them. It was critical because one of the teachers recollected that it was often said, when teachers lose the argument, they reach for the stick. In 1983, the Minister of Education and Training, Mr. Du Plessis, reported in Parliament that the median age of matriculants in Y-designated areas was 19 years and 10 months, while half of the approximately 40,000 teachers his department employed was below the age of 30. This means the majority of the time, the black teacher is not actually competent with their subject, beats you up, believes you to be a suspicious delinquent whose mind must be filled with information, but it's also very young, mid-20s. The principal attested to this. For instance, he tells of a story where one of the students was caught evidently with a confession that they are dating a teacher. The principal called the mother. The mother simply asked the question, is the teacher married? And the principal said, no, he's not married. And the mother said, so what is the problem? Why mustn't my daughter date him? I mean, they're young, he's 25, she's 19. But the main reason for the erosion of the authority, obviously the SRC and the activists in campus, this comes in their interrogation that it disturbs the learning of students for you to be dating them. That is how the authority of the teachers and the school management kept being eroded. But most importantly, it was eroded by the incompetence of the teachers to deal with the critical students. The contest of Azazim and SASCO at the turn of the decade took a violent form, with activists fighting for turf and control. They split into spilled into the streets, where members of Azazim and Xhosas would physically fight each other, including torching each other's homes. I'm jumping a lot because I'm being told that I'm running out of time. The fight became about territorial control and dominance. I want to tell these two quick stories before I conclude, Jacob, if you'll indulge me. It was until, there was the contestations within campus spilled between Azazim and Xhosas. They were called Amazimzi. Those were the Xhosas people, you know that, I hope. And Mavarara were the Xhosas people who believed in the Freedom Charter and so on and so forth. But most of these students, in their other life outside the school, particularly the ones who belonged to Xhosas, which was ANC linked, were engaging in underground activities of sabotage, fighting police, and were beginning to be armed with guns because they were robbing police stations and so on and so forth. But in all this fight for territorial control, the biggest lasting effect was on women comrades or girls. A comrade would date a girl from a different political affiliation or an area dominated by an opposing group would be targeted and dispossessed of the girl. An Azazim comrade once dated a girl from a Varara-dominated area. He tells me of a story where two of the boys saw them standing by the shops and they basically told him to leave the area, forcefully taking the girl from him. The girl was then told that from today, you're not dating this guy, your new boyfriend is the other guy. He said he did not resist. He just, left with humiliation. He never spoke about it. He never even told comrades. A similar but even more dramatic case was of a woman, a Varara woman comrade, who was dating a taxi driver around 1992. During a school trip, when Khopuleng went to Qwaqwa, in a form of a double date, she and her boyfriend and another couple independently went to the destination when Khopuleng was visiting for sports, challenges, and so on and so forth. When they arrived, she tells me that her boyfriend later in the day just suddenly changed and was all moody and grumpy. She says the next thing, the Zimzim arrived, physically assaulted him and the male friend and took her by force to a school bus that was dominated by the Zimzim comrades. In the bus, she was told that she's now dating another Zimzim guy. And that is her new boyfriend. The next day, their relationship started. It was to last for 5 years. In the interview, she says it means I was basically in a forced relationship for all those years. And the boy was physically abusing her until she had to run away to Vereeniging. She speaks of how she feared the boy because he could beat the hell out of her and also beat other people. And he was famous for being a proper murist. She says that she silently left active politics. She did not tell her Varara comrades because she feared it would result into another war that she was seeing where people's houses were torched. She feared for her home, but she also did not want people to fight. So she complied with the relationship. So the forms of masculinity as well that gained hegemony were both physical fighting, but also debating. The separation was collapsed and females were used often as trophies as part of territorial control, but as well as tools to settle different political scores. And these are the activities of this school, the politics of this school, of the Bantu school. Now, the Bantu school as a technology, I'm concluding, I hope I've been coherent, as a technology of subjugation and subjectification was not only useful to the apartheid regime, it was useful and served as an important platform for political identity, a collective political subject to emerge, and emerge in the way it did, with the nuances and complexities it showed. This means power which exists in the interrelational space, and the apartheid school predicated itself on an inhuman thesis. It had a risk of creating its own contradiction, tension, and at times in ways that reaffirmed it, renegotiated it, reformed it, or traversed it way beyond its immediate purposes. The Bantu school, as the site of the production of the inferior black, where a gradual, modest everydayness that comes with 12 years of assessments, assemblies, uniforms, routines after routine, day after day, is indeed one of the greatest tools that apartheid used. It is hard to undo this big monster, okay, with its differentiated ages, classrooms, grades, and standards, and its everydayness. I mean, people go to school every day. It is like creating a pain and then inserting it in the everyday life until it is unimaginable to think your life without that pain. The politics of these young people therefore emerged like a disruption within the system. The very system which provided the conditions for the emergence of this collective subject they embarked on. The apartheid school was rendered dysfunctional, and a new generation of docile blacks refused to emerge. The politics of these youth exposed the reality that the apartheid school is about the perpetual reproduction of the zombification of the cultural spirit among black folks. And this generation of black activists in this school refused such an acculturation. This is just the beginning, and a new school would have to survive if it prepared to teach critical students, critical minds, questioning minds, and minds that always explore the limits of power. That would be the basis of a new school, a school that goes beyond apartheid. We are only able to discover this because of the political activities and the political challenge that these black youth activists put to the system.
That was very, very interesting. And I'm going to shift gears a bit and move from schools to the mines. But also some of the things I think Bisani talked about, risky jobs, those are some of the things I'm going to be talking about, but in the context of mining. And he also mentioned a bit about masculinity and how it was constructed in this in the schools. So I'm going to be talking a bit about that. And what I'm going to talk about today is basically based on the research that I did starting from 2008 and then again in 2011 and 2012. And my research is on women who are working in underground mines and the risky jobs underground in the mines. In 2008, I went to the mines and I lived with the mine workers and I worked with them. But it was I was basically looking at the challenges that women face underground in a space that we associate with men and masculinity. In 2011 and 2012, I returned again to the mines and I was looking at women again, but a different topic this time. I was looking at how women understand themselves underground. I was looking basically at subjectivities, and to try and answer this question again, I went for about a year and I lived with the mine workers and I worked underground with them, and this was in 2011 and 2012, trying to understand how workers understand themselves So today I want to talk about some of my findings from the work that I did with the workers, and also try and see what can we draw from how women who are working underground in mines, what can we draw from that, but also what does it mean for the broader questions of transformation in South Africa. Just as a bit of background, women in South Africa have not always been in mining. It's a new thing. Since 2004, legislation that allowed the incorporation of women into the mines was introduced in 1996 and again in 2002, but women actually started working underground in 2004. So it's relatively new to have women who are working underground in South Africa and who are working in occupations that were seen or continue in some cases to be seen as masculine occupations. So women who are working as winch operators, as panel operators. There's not a lot of women who are working as rock drill operators yet. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. But when we talk about women in mining, and which is what I want to focus about, is we tend to homogenize women in mining. We tend to see them as just a group of women who are in mining. And what I want to show today is that actually there's multiple femininities that are enacted by women underground. And I'm going to show you how women, I hope to demonstrate that actually, how women negotiate femininities underground, these multiple femininities that I want to talk about. So I'm going to talk about 4 femininities. So I'm going to talk about 4 femininities. But I think what's important to remember when I'm talking about these femininities is that these are relational femininities underground. They are in dialogue, in constant dialogue with masculinity. So you cannot talk about these women underground without necessarily talking about men. The two are in constant dialogue. So then what exactly characterizes masculinity underground? I think it's important I go into that first before I go into the femininities that I want to talk about. What characterizes masculinity underground, what they call a real man, a real mine worker, it's really centered on the skill. A mine worker, a real mine worker, has to be able to show skill, that they are able to do certain works in certain ways. If it's drilling the rock, you must be able to demonstrate your skill when it comes to drilling the rock. But it's not just competency in terms of the actual work or the work process itself, but it's also competency in your reading of the environment underground. So you must be able to competently read when a rock is about to fall or when there's things that are happening. That competency is also very important, the accuracy of your competency in reading the space underground. So masculinity is described a lot in relation to production, but also a lot in relation to safety. So you must be able to produce work, to meet the production targets, but you must be able to do this safely. So Planisa, to do both and do them safely and do them effectively, Planisa, and it's something that Eddie talked about yesterday, is right at the center of it. To Planisa is basically to be able to make a plan. So underground there's not always material, for instance. So what do you do when you need to drill and you're short of the drilling sticks? You have to then deploy what they call Planisa. So again, Planisa is at the center of how workers understand masculinity. Additional to Planisa is, in fact, embedded in Planisa is your ability to manipulate a lot of things that are happening underground. So if a miner has marked a face for you and you're supposed to drill 100 holes a day, you must be able to manipulate the distance between those holes and maybe drill 60 holes. But not only manipulate the distance between the holes, manipulate that distance, still be productive, and not have any misfires, for instance, in the case of underground, and have a flat hanging wall when you're done with the drilling. You must be able to hold your your drilling machine very steadily. So it's very heavy. So if you're a man and you're able to hold it steadily, you are a real mine worker. That's how you sing. But also your reading of risks. So when I started working underground, I thought it's just a risky place. But as I was working with teams, I saw that actually there's differences in the risks. And these are informal ways of reading what is a risk. So there's a Madoda risk, there's also a Spukupuku risk, what they call a Spukupuku risk in Fanagalo. So even within the Spukupuku risks, there are different Spukupuku risks. So if it's Spukupuku risk that helps you achieve production targets, then that's a good risk to take. But if it's a risk that does not help you reach production targets, then that's not a good risk to take. So as a man who is seen as masculine, who is competent, you must be able to draw the distinctions between all these multiple risks, about 4 different ways of understanding risks that I noticed. But at the center of it, again, masculinity is the body. The body is very, very important. So yes, you can do the work and you can do it competently and convincingly and consistently, but your body must be able to withstand the underground conditions. Now, if you know, underground is extremely hot and it's also very humid. So there was this rock drill operator who was very good at doing his job and he was very productive. But the problem is that he kept cooling himself down. And so other workers called him a woman. And that was very humiliating. Every time when he was caught cooling himself down, they would reinforce that they see him as a woman, even though he was able to do work and do it well. But this one time, what led to, what the crux of it was that one day, not only was he caught cooling himself down, but he was caught cooling himself down and actually having a minor stroke. And after that day, he never ever returned to the same group. He went to a different group because he was afraid of being ridiculed and seen as a woman. So again, your body is very important in whether you are a real mine worker or not a real mine worker. It's not just about the skill. But I think what was very interesting again for me in these understandings of who's a real mine worker was this intimacy with work that workers had displayed, demonstrated every day. Not just intimacy with work, but with the machines that they were using, intimacy with the environment around them. So in a way, they had to be one with the environment. Before drilling, for instance, you would see the rock drill operators sitting under the rock, singing for their machines and asking their machines to help them meet production targets. Not only singing, after revving the machine, they would break into praise songs. So there was a very, very intimate relationship with the machines. Not only with the machines, when I started working underground again with excitement, I was just banging rocks. If you're bearing down, and they'd be like, no, you need to be gentle with the rock. You need to be one with the rock. You need to let the rock guide you. Listen to the rock, Asanda. Be one with the rock. So again, masculinity being linked with these kind of connections with the environment around you, with these kind of intimacies, and obviously intimacies with other people in the... So then this is what work has understood as masculinity. What then does that mean for my femininities? And I'm going to talk to you about 4 femininities that I think I noticed as I was working with Workers Underground. And the first one is mafazi. So a lot of these terms are terms that I try to stay true to the terms that workers themselves use. So a lot of them are in Fanagalo. They may not make sense in Nguni languages, but they may help you understand what it is if you translate them to Nguni languages. So the first one is mafazi. And the second one is money makers, and the other one is real mafazi. It's not just mafazi, real mafazi. And the other one is madoda straight. And as I talk about these, I'm going to try and just focus on key characteristics of each of these femininities. So the mafazi, for instance, were usually older women, and a lot of them were married to mine workers. And mafazi did not want to do mine work. Excuse me. They did not want to do mine work. For them, mine work was men's work, and so they distanced themselves from mine work, but they didn't do it in a very obvious way. So instead of not doing work, they would take it very easy, very slowly, frustrate the gang to a point where the gang insists on helping her. But the way they understood themselves and the way they continuously talked about themselves, they talked about themselves as mothers, as wives, as sisters. So they talked about themselves as mafazi, not as workers. So that's how they understood themselves underground. But not only is that, so because they constructed themselves as women, as women and as wives, a lot of men insisted on working for them. So this one guy, during a focus group discussions, a lot of women were telling me how men insist on working for them. So this is in Fanagalo. One of them said, for instance, to a worker, when I hlala lapha phansi, when I yenza muhle, fana nalo blom, mina zlayishela wena. Basically, sit over there and make yourself beautiful like a flower, and I'm going to work for you. So a lot of the mafazi men continuously insisted and offered to work for them. And so it's not that they were not working at all, but they were just not doing mine work. So they worked, they went to fetch water for the gangs, they made sure that the gang had proper supply of all the things that they needed, and they also cleaned the stove, cleaned the places around the stove for the men. So they did these menial tasks and emphasized their femininity. So they played on these things that men already assumed about women, these characteristics that men already assumed about women. Part of not wanting to be a mine worker, of wanting to be seen as a mafazi, involved for these women not speaking Fanagalo. So they refused to speak Fanagalo. They saw Fanagalo, just like they saw work, as men's language, as a language that they should not be speaking, as a language that's improper and unfitting for a proper wife. So they did not want to speak Fanagalo. They distanced themselves not only from Fanagalo though, but also